Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dancing into Brain Health podcast. I am your host, Magda Kaczmarska. A strong sense of purpose and meaning is increasingly recognized as having extensive health benefits, including promoting better outcomes after a stroke and being associated with a decreased risk of dementia. For many people who receive a diagnosis of dementia, the pervasive narratives which exist in public discourse paint the experience as one note, characterized solely with tragedy, loss, and deficit. These narratives around dementia inadvertently influence how people who receive a diagnosis perceive their own agency and sense of purpose. Our guest today, Mark Timmons, is showcasing a diametrically different narrative of what it means to be living with dementia. He is illuminating how engaging in the arts can not only support brain health, but also cultivate a new sense of identity and purpose when navigating the experience of dementia. Mark Timmons is an active member of the Eden Alternative and serves as a leader within the Dementia Action Alliance, or DAA. Since being diagnosed with dementia in early 2017 at the age of 48, he has drawn on his personal experience to inform his advocacy and leadership. As his condition has progressed, Mark has focused on the creative arts, strongly supporting the link between artistic expression, movement, and brain health. He is a member of the Eden Alternative's Speakers Bureau and is the longest-serving member of DAA's advisory board, co-hosting several of their virtual engagement programs, including Music Beat and Trivia and Literature and Art, as well as their discussion groups, like Drop In with DAA and Dementia Discussions. In addition to his work with the Dementia Action Alliance, Mark is a photographer, writer, poet, and advocate for causes related to homelessness, mental health, and suicide prevention. Welcome, Mark. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you for reaching out to me, Magda. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to be part of this discussion with you.
Oh, I'm deeply humbled and honored and really delighted to have you on this podcast, Mark. We've had the privilege of serving together on the board of DAA, and I've had the privilege of collaborating with you on several creative projects. And I'm in absolute awe of you. I admire the way you show up for your work, and the depth and the breadth of advocacy that you do alongside engaging in many creative projects. I just think you're incredible. And I'm also really humbled to call you a friend and to have gotten to know you more closely in these last few years. So I'm really thrilled to introduce you to our audience and for them to have a chance to learn about your journey and the amazing work that you do. And so as we start our conversation today, I wondered if you could share a little bit about your background so the audience can get to know you.
Wow. The way you describe the work we do together and our friendship, it just always touches my heart, Magda. It reminds me of quote from Muhammad Ali, and he once said that friendship is the hardest thing in the world to explain. It's not something you learn in school, but if you haven't learned the meaning of friendship, you really haven't learned anything. So being able to call you my friend, in addition to calling you a co-collaborator, a fellow advocate, and at times a mentor, makes it real easy to understand the meaning of friendship without needing words.
My heart is really full, Mark. Thank you for your kindness and your generosity. I'm humbled.
So my background, before I was diagnosed with dementia, I was a tax accountant. For the last 15 or so years, my work was primarily as a fiduciary tax accountant, being responsible for a couple of thousand trusts, estates, and charitable entities. And I had a excellent reputation around the office for being accurate and fast with my work. I worked for one of the largest tax accounting firms in the world at the time of my diagnosis. And during tax season, winter of or fall winter of 2015, leading into January to April of 2016, something changed dramatically, and my job performance just completely fell off the table, and I found myself relying on Post-it notes more than ever before. I found myself having a lot of difficulty learning new changes to tax laws and being able to keep up with the speed that I was used to performing my job at, and that was in late 2015, early 2016. That turned out to be my last season of working, my last season of doing tax work. Over the ensuing year, a lot of testing through different doctors and behavioral health they sent me to see if there was a element of depression that was causing my symptoms. And ultimately, in late 2016, early 2017, I was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And to this day, there's not sure what type of dementia to actually label it as, which is fine by me. The reason for that is that I've been able to maintain a very slow progression that they find uncharacteristic of my symptoms. So since I don't work anymore, I've turned to using my lived experience to start volunteering and working in advocacy roles. Um, Beginning with dementia, but as you said in the introduction, I also advocate for areas involving homelessness, mental health, and suicide prevention, as those were topics that have hit close to home during my lifetime.
Oh, thank you so much for I mean, I'm just in awe of witnessing and hearing your story. Thank you for sharing it with me and with I know not just here in this space, but you've been sharing your story in many spaces. And when I say dementia advocacy, that I think is a big part of it. There's this importance of um, sharing lived experience, and I'm honored that you, alongside the other wonderful folks that I've met through the Dementia Action Alliance, that you have helped shape a lens and an importance of the role of lived experience, right? The saying of we've heard the saying, nothing about us without us, but the way to really understand that is through actual relationship and to really place that into experience. And you have helped illustrate that for me and helped me be a better ally. So thank you for that. I wonder if we can speak about that because that's, I think, a huge part of what I have learned and witnessed from you. And I'd love for our listeners to have a chance to hear about dementia advocacy. That's a big part of your work. I mean, you did speak a little bit of how you got into dementia advocacy, but I'm curious, how did it all begin? When did this start for you? And why do you think it's so important? Why is this so important that dementia the advocates with lived experience are active and heard?
Well, I got started a few months after my diagnosis. About when I was diagnosed, Magda, a lot of people go into have that shock and awe moment when they're first diagnosed. And for me, it was more of a relief because um, there was finally an explanation as to why I was feeling the way I did and why I was struggling the way I was. So once I had that explanation in place, the next logical step was, okay, what am I going to do about it? And because of my background looking at nonprofits from a accounting and tax perspective, I started looking at a lot of different nonprofits around the country on paper that were doing advocacy work, that were involved in the dementia community, because I felt strongly about starting something of my own. And I rationalized that I would look at what other organizations were doing right, what other organizations were doing wrong, and kind of piece the good things together and create my organization based on all these good things that I could glean from other organizations. And then during that process, I came across the Dementia Action Alliance, and the more I looked into them, the more I realized that at the time they were doing everything that I wanted my own organization, hypothetical organization, to do. And light bulb went off one day and said, well, why reinvent the wheel? If DAA, if Dementia Action Alliance is already doing what I want to do, why don't I align myself with them and get involved with them and, continue continue my advocacy through them. And so that's how I initially got into advocacy. And as to the why and why it's important, I feel it's important because dementia is unique, as you know, from person to person, and personalities are unique from person to person, whether there's brain health issues involved or not. And advocacy isn't for everybody, whether by personality choice or because of their brain health condition. Not everybody is able to advocate. So I feel that myself and others that do have the bandwidth and do have the personality to advocate should be advocating for those who can't. Advocacy is important, especially in the dementia sphere, dementia community, because through advocacy is really the best way we're going to go about changing the tragedy narrative to a narrative that is more about hope and purpose and living a life with well-being.
I'm nodding along actively, but I am in awe of your perspective. What I'm hearing from you is, I'm placed in a position that you recognize that you have an opportunity and you're meeting it. That you have an opportunity to speak up and to show up on behalf of not only yourself but a whole community who, like you said, may, for whatever reason, may not be comfortable being in the public space. And witnessing how you approach and how you handle yourself and how you navigate those spaces. It's a really beautiful example of how to be an ally or an advocate. And I'm also drawn to the words that you're using of what that that a narrative that we as a society should have of dementia should also that this experience of living with dementia can also include hope and a sense of purpose. And we really should be doing our best to partner together and allow that to be part of the complexity and the diversity of experience, that there isn't just a single note and a single perspective. We've had a lot of one particular perspective, and seeing the experience of living with dementia only through that perspective is limiting to all of us. And I thank you for helping formulate a new perspective, not just for me, but also for anybody who gets a chance to interact with you. I know that you have served in many ways, but one of the ways that I know you has been through your advocacy work with the Dementia Action Alliance. And you are their longest standing advisory board member. And you have also served on the actual board of members as well. So you've definitely done your share of advocacy and service work. Not only through this, but I think also through your work in direct relationship with other people who are living with dementia. What have you noticed in working with individuals living with dementia in this capacity? What have you experienced and what have you noticed through your work?
Well, first of all, like I've already mentioned, I noticed that everybody comes into their diagnosis. If you've seen one person with dementia, you've only seen one person because condition, everyone's symptoms, everybody's situation is unique. And I think that is one reason why it's historically been so hard to treat, to come up with effective treatments, because not, one size does not fit all when it comes to treating dementia. What I've noticed is that everyone who comes into the Dementia Action Alliance, looking for support or looking for answers to questions, everyone needs meaning and purpose. And yeah, that holds true, outside of the dementia community as well. But when you're told you have this illness and you're told a tragedy narrative, and that you need to stop doing what you've been doing for occupation, or you have to stop participating in interests that you've had your entire life, it really strikes a blow to understanding what your meaning and purpose is in life. And so when people first come into DAA, that's one thing I notice, is that they're searching. And so I and other leaders in the organization, we try to help them find purpose. We try to help them see that their life still has meaning. I have an analogy, a story that I like to use. I mean, I use this not only in DAA, but when I'm out, at gallery showings of my photography, or if I'm out speaking in the my local community. And I try to explain to people that, you picture your life as a book, and you suddenly get this diagnosis of dementia. It doesn't mean your book is finished. It doesn't mean your life is over. You just got to turn the page. And now you've got a new page to start writing, a new chapter of your life to start writing, that begins with, at this point in my life now, what is my purpose? So for my own lived experience, the chapter of my book called, Mark the Tax Accountant, well, that chapter's over with. But I turn the page, and now it's, now I have other chapters to read and to write, chapters called Mark the Advocate, Mark the Photographer, Mark the Writer. There's still a lot of life left. And there's still a lot of pages to be written, and there's still a lot of chapters to read. And this is the message that I try to tell everybody that I meet, that's living with dementia for the first time, is that there is still a lot of life out there left to live. And it's very important to maintain a mindset, maintain a sense of meaning and purpose in order to continue to live a life with well-being.
Thank you. I, as I'm listening to you speak, what is emerging for me is this sense of emergence, of discovery, of curiosity, of the importance of that perspective that you bring to your life, and witnessing you alongside other peers at DAA. That is something that I have learned, and that fuels me in the work that I do, to ensure that I do everything in my power to support a nurturing space, a space that allows and amplifies, reflects, mirrors those aspects of discovery and emergence and possibility. And I see you modeling that, and I'm also, I guess, fortunate through my experience with you and with others at DAA to have witnessed this happen many times. And I know it has helped shape my viewpoint of what thriving and living with dementia can look like. And I hope that more people can have access to this, that more spaces are ones like the ones that we have shared together, that you have been helping build. I can only imagine what all of us living in society would benefit from if that was the narrative that we had. That was the dominant narrative, as opposed to what many of us still perceive initially. So thank you for that. And my hope is that this continues to blossom and amplify, kind of to use your analogy, that that one book turns into an encyclopedia or a whole library of books, like in Trinity College Dublin, like this massive row of books, tons and
Yes,
tons of long tomes of many chapters that we're
yes.
all writing individually and together. So thank you for that. And speaking of books, um, you are an incredibly prolific artist. You mentioned yourself that you have gallery exhibits, you're a photographer, and a poet. Um, I know that you spoke a little bit about this, and I mentioned it in in the introduction. You've mentioned it a little bit already, but can you speak to your journey of embracing yourself as an artist?
Well, before life changed after my diagnosis, before that took place, I would never have used the word artist to describe myself, first of all. Sure, I dabbled with photography, but with more time on my hands after my diagnosis and I stopped working. And the more that analytical side of my brain which I had to use all the time at my job, at my profession, the more that analytical side struggled, the more the creative side of my brain seemed to start thriving. And out of that became a new love for photography, for the arts. And so I started embracing that as an artist. I just finished talking about everyone needing to find a new purpose after their diagnosis. For me, it was this creative, using this creative side of my brain to contribute, to support a new purpose in life. Uh, And then, it kind of evolved from beginning with my photography into writing, as originally writing was a release, was a way to journal and describe what I was feeling, both about my own health and then later on, after the untimely death of my son, being able to handle my grief through writing. And that was sort of what launched me into writing poetry. And it's just been a constantly evolving process, Magda, where I learned to combine the two creative interests. And now I write poetry that I can superimpose on some of my photographic prints. I'm now working on a book that that I envision having original poems on one side with some of my photographs included on the opposite side of pages as you flip through it. I did have my first poem published just over the summer, just in July, I think it was, for the first time. That was just one poem in this anthology, but that was exciting for me, and that's kind of amped up the motivation to get my own book published with all of my it. But more than the self satisfaction I get from embracing the arts and embracing photography and poetry specifically, is that I can also use as a tool to further my advocacy. For example, when I do have a gallery show for my photos, for my photographic works, during the opening night, I'll often give a presentation about dementia and do some advocacy on opening night. A lot of my poetry now is written from the perspective of someone living with dementia. So there's poems about dementia that I've written that will find their ways into my book one of these days. So it's not just self-serving, these creative interests, but it's also furthering my one of my new purposes in life, which is advocacy and changing the narrative about dementia and about the other areas that I advocate.
I wish you live not too far away from me, so I'm really hoping one of these days I can attend one of these gallery exhibits. But for our listeners, you don't have a chance to stop by and actually see an in-person gallery of Mark's work. In the show notes, you will find a link to his website where you can find a lot of his photography. And we also are featuring a few other. So Mark is a very prolific presenter and speaker. So we've included a few other presentations of his in our show notes, where some of which include some of his artwork. So you will have a chance to check it out. And we've also included a link to um, his most recently published poetry. And keep an eye out for when his book of poetry and art is published. I hope we'll see it soon. Um, so you mentioned already a little bit of how your work as an artist is, in, or actually how you've really intentionally utilized your work as an artist to kind of support your own journey in discovering and building, kind of writing a new narrative and a sense of meaning and purpose for yourself. And you've been using this to amplify your advocacy. I'm curious, if you have perceived that engaging in these various forms of creative expression has been supporting your brain health? Have you noticed anything about that? And would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, sure. Photography has definitely contributed to supporting my brain health in ways that it often is a grounding experience for me. So what I mean by that is, if because of my symptoms, the hustle and bustle of everyday life can get overwhelming. I can sometimes grab my camera, go off into nature, and be able to ground myself in nature. My photography leans a lot towards landscapes and still lifes and nature topics. So photography does support my brain health that way. Poetry, writing and poetry specifically, as a result of my symptoms, I sometimes have difficulties with communication, with verbal communication. Being able to write what I'm feeling often breaks down that barrier for me to be able to then, okay, I've written it, I can read it to myself, and now it breaks down that mental barrier that I can now talk about it. So both these creative interests have lent themselves in very strong ways towards supporting my brain health.
Wow. I I think it's spectacular that mm, with the amount of intention that you bring into everything that you do. I hope that you inspire me to be more intentional and more aware. What I'm hearing you say is this awareness. I think with awareness comes an appreciation. When we can take the space to how the things that we do serve or potentially hinder our health and well-being, we can then be really appreciative, but also intentional with how we navigate and engage with those things. And what I'm
Absolutely.
hearing from you is this very really strong sense of awareness and then an action on your part of continuing to turn to this as a way of supporting and extending your health and well-being. And it's a beautiful model that I'm inspired by, and I hope that our listeners will be inspired by as well. There's so much, you mentioned overstimulation. I think we're bombarded with so much sensory and cognitive material constantly. I think many times we don't even realize it. And what you've mentioned is, first of all, an awareness of that and how that overstimulation affects you and your well-being and your ability to be present in a way that feels good for you. And then that you've identified these actions which help. I mean, wow.
Intention, awareness, and appreciation. I mean, they all go together, right? It really helps you, if you think about it, nobody knows what tomorrow's going to bring. Nobody knows if we're going to be here individually if we're still going to be here tomorrow. And having that appreciation and that intention and that awareness for today, even for the moment that you're in. The old saying, stopping to smell the roses, so overused over the years that that tends to get kind of, it loses its impact. But that's what this is all about, really. Time is my commodity now. Living with intention, living with appreciation and gratitude, and having awareness for the things that bring me well-being and the things that bring me happiness, joy, and peace. These are all um, aspects that I don't want to take for granted anymore.
Yeah. I'm moved by your words very deeply. I just learned earlier today, or actually last night, that a dear colleague of mine passed away. And she was actually a guest on this podcast several months ago. And actually, what she spoke about, Dr. Glenna Batson, what she spoke about was very exactly what you're speaking about. This She spoke about an embodiment bill of rights and how we all should have this, and um that's exactly what you were mentioning right now, that we have a right to have our attention not be jerked around, that we have a right to be present, that we have a right to have autonomy in our bodies, and that um our bodies is what we walk through the world with. And so we deserve this space. And the way you spoke about it right now, just it felt really serendipitous. And I was debating whether I should mention her, but I feel it is right. I want to honor her. I want to celebrate her. And thank you for holding space to and creating an opportunity to hold space for her and the words and the legacy that she brings, because I hear it reflected in what you're saying perfectly. I believe, and I'm learning, and I'm believing more and more, the more I have the privilege of working with people like yourself, the more I hear this that engaging in creative expression creates space. It creates opportunities for us
Yes.
to be present to ourselves, with ourselves, to be present with one another, and it cultivates uh, our ability, our muscle of humanity, of relationship, whether that is with our environment, with ourselves, or with one another, and an appreciation for that. And understanding that there is an impermanence, and that doesn't have to be something that is only filled with a sense of loss, but rather with a sense of awe and appreciation and gratitude. Words that you just shared yourself.
And these are, you've asked, we've touched on different topics, it seems, in the last half hour, but they're really all part of the same ball. Because what we're talking about here, whether it's changing the tragedy narrative, whether it's finding purpose and meaning in life, whether it's stopping to smell the roses, it's all about instilling this sense that well-being and happiness and love can still be enjoyed by people living with any kind of a brain health condition.
Mhm, mhm. Exactly. That was a mic drop moment, Mark Timmons. Oh my goodness. I mean, we're dear friends. I'm sending you a hug. I feel the need for some tethering. And speaking of tethering into the body, we've recently had a chance to add uh, uh, a new identifier, I guess, if we may say, to your artistic expression. I've been really privileged to get to know you as a dancer and choreographer. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit your thoughts on that and your experience with dance and movement.
Well, boy. Well, if you happen to speak to anybody in my social life, yeah, they're not gonna agree with you when it comes to calling me a dancer or a choreographer. But I'm working on it, people. I'm working on it. Um, well, my experience with dance and choreography comes from really from 2 projects that you and I work on together, and that's your group, Stories in the Moment, and the literature and art group that I lead in DAA. We recently, as you know, we worked on this poem, collaborative poem that we wrote in the literature and art group called Rising Up. It's a poem about someone battling mental illness and battling with the will to live. And much like I explain how my own creative process has evolved from, you know, photography and writing separately to kind of putting them together. It's an evolving process. I've noticed that when it comes to the beginning with the collaborative poem that we wrote, it's been a constant evolution where the first we had the poem, and then you and I got to talking, and we came up with the idea that we move the poem out of the space of the literature and art group and into the space of stories in the moment, where we can then look at adding some choreography, some dance vocabulary to it, so that there was an evolution taking place. And then it evolved even further where, okay, we've sort of have the movements in place, the vocabulary in place. What can we do with it next? And so there's, now there's talk about music, putting music to it or putting some type of performance to it. So it's just been fascinating watching this evolutionary process with this one piece of writing that was started about a year ago now. But what I've learned in my limited time and limited experience with dance, working with you, collaborating with you, is that in addition to dance, for lack of a better word, as a sport or a dance for physical exercise, it's an extension of the artistic process. Again, it's an evolution of the artistic process. Um, And that's what I've seen firsthand through Stories in the Moment and the work that we collaborate on together with the literature and art group.
Yeah, I thank you. Evolution, I think, is a great word. As you're speaking, I'm recalling a little bit earlier in our conversation when you were speaking about poetry, and you mentioned how sometimes finding the right words to express yourself verbally is difficult, but through engaging in the act of poetry, you are discovering a source of expression and communication for yourself, but also a reflection, almost like uh, the process of the writing and witnessing your own words in the poem is helping you understand your feelings and I mean, for myself as a dancer and a mover, I've always been struck with how poetry and dance have a lot more similarity than might initially be perceived. I've been kind of obsessed with this, actually having worked on a dance piece where we collaborated. I collaborated with a poet, Marina Blitzstein, and where we used both her words and some of my choreographic ideas, and actually collaboratively with the dancers. But I've always been aware of the fact that in order to understand a poem, you can't necessarily look at it directly on. You kind of have to allow it to wash over you,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Like, it's not necessarily something that you look at and digest literally. A poem is something that is, um, I don't know, a little bit more complicated and also very simple, right? And I used to think of it and explain, like, reading poetry or understanding a dance, kind of like looking at those paintings where, like, you have to cross your eyes to look at them, and then, like, this three-dimensional image pops out. I don't remember what those things are called, but they were really big when I was growing up, and I've always felt like reading a poem is a little bit like that, that you you kind of have to notice what images and feelings come up for you as opposed to just focusing on the words themselves.
Mhm.
And I think dance is similar, even whether it's a narrative dance, like many ballets, or whether it's a more abstract dance. It's about allowing those steps and the relationships of those steps being expressed by the people dancing them, allowing that to wash over you and then for those feelings to emerge. And I'm excited. I love that you mentioned the Rising Up project. I'm excited to see. I mean, we've already witnessed it. We've already witnessed some of those ideas and feelings expressed through words in the poem being translated into movement vocabulary being expressed in the body. Um, and I'm excited to see what that next step is going to be and for what audience members will perceive when they witness it.
Absolutely. Me too.
So I guess we're getting a little sneak preview, and now we really have to make sure we get this project out. It's been time stamped.
Certainly have.
So we've spoken a lot about actually a lot of benefits already from this experience, from the experience of various art, whether it's poetry, visual art, photography, whether it's dance or choreography. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts or if you perceive any potential benefits of dance on brain health specifically.
I mean, that's a question that you're much more qualified to answer than me, but I'll give it a shot. I think that dance, it benefits brain health it stimulates the brain on multiple fronts. You know, you have cognition that it stimulates when it comes to counting and keeping rhythm and beat and understanding the movement vocabulary. But then it simultaneously your brain is also instructing your body in its movements and instructing your torso to move one way and your arms and legs to move in a way, and it's doing all of that simultaneously. You know, I think that itself has a very positive effect on brain health in ways that it creates new connections, new neuron connections in your brain in order to accomplish the whole dance experience, and I think that's a very positive impact on brain health.
Thank you. Yeah, I the coordination, right? I like the way that you said that, that instructing. Um this understanding that our brains are embodied, right? Our brains are in our bodies. And so not only building connections within the different regions, neighborhoods, highways in our brain, but also reinforcing the connection between our body and our brain, right? The fact that they do, in fact, exist together.
You could say that dance is if you're looking at it as if you're looking at brain health and brain exercise, you could say that dance is a complete brain workout.
Hmm. Okay.
And then there's less tangible benefits of dance on brain health, and that's the feel good response, the endorphins, the I never thought I could do that before and I did it. And you know, it goes back to a word I've been saying a lot this morning, and that's well-being, and it goes back.
Mhm.
So dance contributes to brain health in a sense that it both can bolster your well-being as well.
100%. I actually, the more that I've been engaging in this work, and especially in meeting folks like you yourself, I come back to that meaning and purpose and that well-being, that sense of this feels good. And I deserve to feel good. And I'm surprised in myself that I'm discovering that I'm doing this thing that I didn't think. And I mean, but nobody else in my world, like you said, nobody else would describe you as a dancer, right? Well, here you are. You're proving them wrong, Mark Timmons. I think that more and more, I'm thinking that that is actually the most important part. And obviously, I love dance, but I think it goes for multiple art forms. And because of the fact that they make us feel good and they allow us to discover something about ourselves, that inadvertently means that we keep on doing them. And we go along on this journey and discover things along the process about ourselves. And that process of discovery is novelty, and we know that's good for our brain.
Right, right.
And then the more we continue it, then we can also elicit some of those other positive benefits of dance as a multimodal activity, a complex activity on our physical activity or our aerobic exercise, right? We're doing all of these other things that we know are good for us. And so we get these other benefits that are directly good to, helpful to our brain. But rather than thinking thinking about those as the primary, I think those as like secondary or tertiary, even whatever the next word would be, quaternary. Honestly, I think the most important part is what you said, is that emergence, discovery, feeling good about the fact that you're doing something new and you're seeing yourself doing it well. Uh, so brava to you. It takes courage to try something new, and you're doing it.
Trying.
So, we are coming up to the end of our time today, my friend, but I wanna ask you this, we ask all of our guests on the podcast to share a personal experience, and that could be an experience either of the impact of dance or on the arts of their lives. And I wonder, is there an experience, either one that you have experienced yourself or one that you've witnessed, that has helped you feel the magic of dance and the arts and health and well-being?
Great, great question, Magda. In stories in the moment, I witness people with limited mobility and compromised brain health participate, and just like we were just talking about, participate and feel good while doing so. Um, in the literature and art group that I lead with in DAA, I see the smiles on people's faces when they see the progress we make, when we collaboratively work on that rising up poem, and we read the finished poem, and just the people that contributed to it are just like, wow, we did that in both examples. um, it's supporting and increasing well-being, and I think that's what injects me with that feeling of the magic that the arts can have, that the arts can put forth on people.
Yeah, you said the word. I'm not sure if you said it, but the way you held your body, and I've witnessed this in Stories in a Moment in our dance program that we collaborate on. But you witness it with the literature and art group that you facilitate or co-facilitate, and I sense the word pride. I'm not sure if is that a
Yeah.
word that you would feel comfortable with?
Yes. Yes, that's a good word to use. That magic. Another word for that magic would be the pride that people feel, both in stories in the moment and literature and art.
Yeah. Where do you think that pride stems from?
A sense of accomplishment, of overcoming real, of personally experiencing being able to overcome your symptoms
Mm.
in a positive way, where I can often sense a little bit of self-doubt in some of the people that are in our groups, and when they see the finished product that just blows that self-doubt, out the door, and just fills them with pride and satisfaction that, yeah, I I contributed to this, I did this.
Yeah, that's that's it. And that again, I just come back to how that is really the most important thing, right? That our voice matters, that we are all part of something bigger than ourselves, and we're an important part to that. We're contributing actively. I learned that from you. I perceive it from the folks that I'm privileged to work with in NDAA and other spaces, and I thank you for modeling it, and I thank you today for sharing your story and giving an opportunity for others to witness it and to hopefully also hold space for it in their communities. Thank you so much, Mark Timmons. I just want to ask, is there any last thoughts, at least for today, that you'd like to share?
Well, I wanna, of course, thank you for having me on. You and I have many discussions like this privately off camera. Um, but it's great to be able to get this information out there, to get these conversations out there for the benefit of others. So you mentioned my willingness to share my story. That comes back to being willing to advocate because not everybody is willing or able to advocate. Um, if my lived experience, if the journey I've been on for the last 8 years or so now, I think it is, however long it's been, if that can help support someone newly diagnosed with that's living with a lot of uncertainty, if that can help inspire someone to seek out their own new purpose in life and their own sources to obtain well-being, that's really what it's all about for me, and that's what makes it worthwhile. I think I'm just kind of summarizing, what we've been talking about for the last hour, and that's just how important the arts are, and collectively the arts, whether it's visual arts, whether it's literature, whether it's dance. The importance of arts on brain health cannot be overstated. In fact, I think most of the time it's very understated because like the quote from Muhammad Ali about friendship, the importance of arts, it's so important. There sometimes aren't the right words, aren't enough words, superlative adjectives, just to drive that point home of how important the arts are to brain health. And if any of your listeners draw anything from this conversation today, I hope it's that there are few ways of supporting brain health that surpass embracing the arts.
Hmm. Another mic drop. Oh, Mark, I know we could go on talking for hours, but I'm deeply, deeply grateful to you. Thank you for joining us on the Dancing into Brain Health podcast. Thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for being you, and thank you for being a friend.
It's been a pleasure, Magda, and both being on the show, being part of this podcast, and being your friend. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to continued friendship and continued collaboration.
Here, here. All right. This episode of Dancing into Brain Health was edited and produced by me, Magda Kaczmarska, and Hilary Brown Estraffi. The music for this show is the title cut from the album Critical Path by Joe Venegoni and Carl Weingarten. Show notes, links, and resources from today's episode can be found on the Dancing into Brain Health page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.